Welcome everyone. So we'll start with the next session, that is securing urban and rural future. So Kunte sir, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. It is indeed a honor and a pleasure to preside over this second session today about securing urban and rural futures. This is part of a conference, National Conference on Securing Demographic Dividend, agenda for 24 to 29. The idea being that whatever transpires in these deliberations, whatever new points we come up with, we will give it to the political parties that, through PIC of course, to the political parties who will study them and probably include them in their manifesto. Maybe some good suggestions will get adopted by the incoming government and some good reforms will happen. Just to to impress upon you the importance of this exercise, a couple of months back I was teaching public policy to a bunch of students in the Oakley Institute. And I was teaching them a concept called policy window. Policy window. Policy window is a concept developed by two academicians, Mr. Leslie and Mr. Kingdon, not Kingdom, Kingdon. And what they have analyzed policy making over so many years is that policies don't get made every day. Every policy gets made in a certain window which is created by the circumstances of that time. They have analyzed various circumstances under which policies get made. One of them is, of course, when an election happens and a new government takes over. They have fresh mind, they are open to new ideas, and that is the time a policy window opens. There are other instances of policy windows, like some sort of a crisis. So you all know that P.V. Narasimha Rao ji and Manmohan Singh ji, they opened up Indian economy. They reformed a lot of things in the Indian economy. After a situation arose where we had to take our gold and deposit into IMF coffers, a Bank of England. That is on bigger scale. At a smaller scale policy window, I can give you a local example of Pune. There were these anti-superstition activists who wanted a bill to be passed against superstition. Over a decade, they were going back and forth between themselves and state and committees and so on. And a very unfortunate trigger happened. Dabolkarji was assassinated in Pune. And it created a situation under which the bill which was pending for a decade got passed within a fortnight. So policy windows are very important, and that is what the theory of Leslie Paul and Kingdon says, that all those who work in policy advocacy must have their gunpowder ready with policy recommendations and wait for the policy window to come. And election and new government is a policy window that is waiting to happen in the next few months. So taking advantage of this particular situation in time and the fact that urban and rural futures are very important for economic growth in the coming 5 years, we'll start this session. We'll start first with a presentation by Professor Pradeep Apte. His theme is securing rural future. Over to you, Pradeep.
So friends, I have a very peculiar task because I took the title a little more seriously. Demographic transition or having a demographic dividend is not a very short-term process. It's a fairly long-term process. So there are two parts which I am going to talk about. One, there are certain parts which I think which need to be addressed or could be initiated much earlier. Probably this entire transition that we are envisaging is going to take at least one or one and a half generation, nearly 30 years. And what needs to be done if we were to handle such a long period, which would be fraught with so many kinds and sources of uncertainty. Usually economists should not venture to make such kind of a speculative thinking when it comes to future, and particularly the future which is a long-term future. So in a way there are two kinds of poles with which you are required to deal with. One is something what Keynes said, in the long run we are all dead. And on the other hand, you have a person like Arthur Clarke, who wrote a very elegant, impressive book called Profiles of Future. And Arthur Clarke, as you know, is very prophetic in many ways. He was the first in 1947 to predict that there would be something like a satellite, because of which one of our friends is going to join us. And he predicted that, and the world seized upon it, and those who seized upon it were in fact foreign exchange traders, and that's how the so-called network for the foreign exchange traders emerged. The SWIFT number that we quote is in fact that Society for Worldwide International Financial Transaction, and that was Clarke's gift. Clarke also predicted the nature and the sizes and the position of many moons of Jupiter, which we will not be able to see at all. But when Voyager went and took the photos, they exactly matched the description. And the third thing, he has in the very same book said that by 2050 we would have reached near immortality. And that is something which is in fact posing us a fairly big, important demographic transition issue, because we are going to have a very large population which will be alive for a fairly long period of time, and given several other factors, as a result of which the working population as a proportion of total population is already small enough, how we will be able to deal with this kind of age-wise distribution of our entire population cohort. To talk about agriculture is of course very difficult. Yesterday Dr. Kelkar referred to, when we were discussing Ajay Shah's presentation, you can see it in whichever way, because it's a Janus kind of a figure that we are discussing. You can talk about it in either way. When it comes to agriculture, it is in fact a polyhedra like Janus, not only two-faced but multiple problems. So to understand the rural and agricultural situation, why agriculture? Because that happens to be and continues to be one of the dominant sectors which is prevalent in rural areas. So there are certain things which are in fact legacy issues, and these legacy issues probably are the issues on which one can work in a relatively short period of time, partly because we have attempted number of things but have in one or other way or for one or more reasons failed to accomplish them. If we look at our own progress in agriculture, we started in a situation of high import dependence even for food grains. Then we achieved something what could be called as self-sufficiency, and within a short span of time we also became in fact a net exporter of variety of agricultural products, more notably food grains in 1975 itself. There are many transitions which have occurred, and many of these transitions are not always enough noticed. For example, because of the transitions and the changes that have occurred to agriculture, our food basket has undergone a change, because agricultural product basket has undergone a change. For example, till 80s, most of the vegetables were not available unless they were in that particular season. There was a seasonality attached to the vegetables. Now, for a very large part of a country, and for a very large number of vegetables, they are available almost as if they are perennially available, always available at any season. Why did this occur? Because of some of the changes that were introduced, and they started manifesting their impact a little later. 1980-82, we changed the seed policy, and the seed policy allowed importation of certain lines of vegetables and fruits, as a result of which we have this particular harvest that we are now enjoying, where we get almost across the year all kinds of vegetables in many parts of the country. There are many such issues which we had tackled, but At the same time, there are many changes that have occurred, and some of these changes have a rather lingering or rather overshadowing kind of an impact. If one thinks of what are the issues in agriculture, first thing that typically come to mind is what happened to scarcities of certain types. And the policies that were addressed were primarily designed to address those issues continue in large measure in a similar manner. For example, food grains. We tried to overcome this by not only a green revolution but also an institutional setup. Yesterday, Ajay Shah referred to institutions. We created an institution that too by the government itself, which entered and engaged itself and continues to engage itself in very large quantum of trade, and that is Food Corporation of India. It was not merely introduction of new variety of seed, but what would happen if this seed was to be promoted among the farmers? It would require many what we typically call backward linkages. You would require chemical fertilizers, you would require power, you would require water, and so on and so forth. All such things were orchestrated and attempted to be organized, most notably in the 3 states which in fact continue to dominate the scene of food grain production, particularly in case of wheat and also now rice of late in last 2 decades, is that they could transform itself. That design persists. That overwhelming influence and presence of Food Corporation of India and the crop pattern with which we tried to address the issue of food scarcity persist with very unimaginable kind of a size of proportion. For example, look at the stocks that typically FCI carries. It's very large. So much large that in fact even current Prime Minister finds it comfortable to declare that for another 5 years this so-called free ration will continue to be there for another 6 years, probably up to 2030. This happens because of FCI. Is it worthwhile to operate the way in which FCI has been operating even now, including the present scheme today, is the issue that we have never addressed, because that is considered to be the best possible solution, because it was probably the reasonable solution maybe 40 years back. We continue and persist with that even now, in spite of the known distortions, known options of reforming it, but we have failed to reform it. Second issue, which again 4 years back cropped up. Since 2002, there have been attempts to reorganize and reform functioning of agricultural marketing system in India. It has many facets. Just to cut short, let us call them as approach to regulated marketing that used to prevail, and how to replace that system that was installed in variety of states, not all states. Some of the states which are in fact opposing those legislation did not even have that legislation. So there was an attempt to scrap it, partly because on the one hand, constitutionally, agriculture happens to be primarily a domain of state governments. For a variety of reasons, state governments were goaded to join union government, primarily to address the very burning problem of food scarcity. So we created certain kind of a system of regulated markets, at least in some states, but the market was never regulated or limited to the states. It is inherently, naturally national market. Should state governments have a policy capacity to influence the functioning of a national market? Actually, the answer is no. In fact, precisely because it is no, answer is no, the national markets continue to function. Because if the state governments try to, in some way or other, interfere with it, it is likely to create all different kinds of problems. So the market, the agriculture may be a state subject, but agricultural marketing cannot be confined to state. It is inherently a national, for that matter, even an international kind of a market access that one has to think about. In view of this, there was a need to, in fact, start with a kind of a clean state. But usually such clean states are scarcely available when it comes to policy, because there are legacies. You have already committed, there are some legislation, so on and so forth. So considering these distortions that were introduced as a result of functioning of the regulated markets, the union government persuaded the state governments to form and reform their laws. In fact, they also circulated after the appeal. Not much response was actually forthcoming. So in 2006, there was something what was called a Model Act for the agricultural product that was circulated among states. Some states, on a selective basis, incorporated some features in functioning of the market to the extent there was some players who were interested in introducing those kinds of things. For example, in Maharashtra, there is a regulated market, but there are also several other licenses with which you would be able to operate trading in agricultural products in a variety of ways. Selective basis, sometimes because you are of the trader of this type, therefore you are exempted, so on and so forth. So can it be made relatively more simpler, transparent, and more or less homogeneous across nations in order to integrate markets so as to make the flows even more competitive, even more price stabilizing and so on? But that attempt has failed. One can dispute the manner in which, the timing in which it was introduced, etc. But the spirit of that is something which is in fact among the policy making circles, including state governments, they agree to it. But how and in what phases that would happen remains to be in fact sorted out. Maybe perhaps if we could achieve something like GST, we should also make an exercise to achieve a similar kind of a consensus by federating all states together to overcome this kind of an issue. Three commodities dominate. One is wheat and rice, second milk, third sugar, because these were the most scarce commodities at one point of time, particularly in the initial 30 years after the independence. The responses that emerged from agricultural sector to address this were of various types. Milk scarcity was very different. Across states it was different, even within states, region-wise, even district-wise it used to be different. There are certain technologies, and more importantly, the another element that Ajay Shah yesterday referred to, creating institutions which deal with it. For example, cooperation was in fact at one point of time considered to be in fact a universal panacea for most of the problems prevailing in agriculture. So much so that in fact in one of the proposed Congress resolution way back in 1957, there was also a proposal to establish cooperative farming, which Charan Singh in fact opposed in the Congress. But the cooperation worked, because cooperation was a different kind of an institution to deal with this trade opportunity of producing something and selling something across different states, even at large distances. So Amul was one, and Maharashtra took in fact somewhat different role. Not only Maharashtra, there are certain other states as well. For example, we also in fact undertook a campaign to have artificial insemination, imported another line of cows to breed them, to produce more milk, and we have a system where the cooperatives cooperative of the milk producers collects milk, then sells it at different centers and so on and so forth. Many of them again go across states, because it is not the state market alone to which they are required to address. So with this, there are different kinds of institutional innovations that were introduced. In some cases they worked, in some cases they failed. For example, similar looking structure of cooperatives in sugar processing, it works differently in Gujarat and it works differently in Maharashtra. Their yield wise, their consumption of water, etc., the varieties that they introduced and the prices that they offer to the participating farmers in cooperatives, there are very wide differences. But still there is something which can be called as an institutional solution, because it was not pre-existent. It had to emerge. It had to change the modality of conduct of the trade in those commodities, which has emerged. Why am I mentioning this? Because it was realized that beyond a point, cooperation becomes in fact not a very effective tool to operate on grounds, not only in production but also even in trading. There are some problems with the Cooperation Act itself. Old Act, fairly old Act, 1912, but the kind of participation and the regulatory impositions that the state government kept on accumulating, that became not a very most convenient form for federating farmers together and change their business opportunities. So there was an idea which is being tried for almost for now probably 2 decades, what is called Farmers Producer Organization, FPOs. We have now some experience at least accumulated in the FPOs, another institutional potential possible solution, but has not always worked to the extent it was thought it would be working. In fact, the cost of conducting a company is as complicated as perhaps a cooperative, and probably farmers don't find it very convenient. Mostly it works better in case of trading in certain urban centers rather than uniformly across all sectors. There have also been situations where cooperative societies came together and formed a private company, private partnership company among the cooperatives in order to reach the market. The best example it that being the Grape Growers Association formed these cooperatives, and these cooperatives form a partnership which was called Mahagrape, and that triggered the export, and now Mahagrape is on the 8th number, because many other traders, many other farmers took that initiative and made those exports entirely private. Now it's not anymore Mahagrape aided by Maharashtra state government and so on. But in the course, when they started addressing the market, like for example Europe, they had to face severe barriers which are mostly residue-based barriers, and in order to deal with that, government in fact floated another institutional arrangement, that of giving a certification, because otherwise getting a certification was very expensive. So we started our own agency, Maharashtra government's own agency in agriculture department, where this certification problem was solved. More importantly, it applied certain novel techniques. The farmers are in connection with the state right from the plantation till they dispatch their product, and something what is usually called tracing from the plate to farm backwards becomes possible. And there is an inventory, there is a repertoire of everything procedure-wise which is now available with variety of state governments. So there have been also some institutional innovations that have occurred. The question now is, can we scale it up and make it more widely practicable? Many of these things became feasible partly because of the nature of technology. And this is one major issue which is often not appreciated. And that is something which I'm going to emphasize a little more. What is going to be a kind of agriculture that we hope to exist in coming 30 years? It is not going to be the same usual conventional field or open field agriculture. There are going to be many, many modifications, because now technology available is of very different sort. Agriculture per se is in fact the most first major artificial action by the human beings on the natural processes, because we tend the plants in a manner which suits us best. How to do that has progressed phenomenally in the last 50 years because of understanding that we have at a molecular level in the functioning of the plants. So now no one anymore gives the dosage of the type that we used to recommend. For wheat, get so much for urea, combine it with phosphate, etc. All this is likely to probably wither away, because now delivery of fertilizers as well as the irrigation water are going to be mostly combined. Not only that, it would be extremely measured, and it is going to be in much, much smaller quantity than was envisaged earlier in the phase which is often now called the era of chemical agriculture. This is going to be one major shift which is going to occur. This also requires water to be administered in a manner which is also equally measured, just as much as we are going to measure the small minute dose of fertilizer or the hormones that we are going to administer to plants. This is going to be the order of the day in coming 30 years. On the one hand, we face, for a variety of reasons, variety of causes, the labor scarcity in agriculture. Another problem, we usually, economists tend to teach development models starting with labor surplus economy, and how that surplus labor not capable of providing even the critical minimum wage could be drawn to the industries, typical dual model of Lewis. But something of that sort has happened in variety of ways in agriculture, and the labor scarcity is a major problem. Because of this scarcity, there is some hidden labor which is often not noticed by the very statistical system which tries to record what kind of employment we are getting. Very large parts of the country, it is the women who work, but it is not often recorded as being the principal work and the occupation of women. In fact, in many parts, it is mostly the women. You go in the sowing season, you go in the harvesting season, and you will not find many males, but mostly females working on the fields in number of states. But this does not get reflected in the nature of employment data that we have got. But women are already part of agriculture, so much so that the very same people who are saying that the participation has fallen also are at the same time talking about feminization of agriculture. Another academic paradox. But the fact is that we are going to have a situation where the female labor will continue to be a major source of labor power needed in agriculture, and that needs to be a lot more trained, because now the agriculture that you are going to practice is going to have a lot more skill requirements in understanding doses, in administering number of things and so on. And that's how comes the issue which is equally burning in rural areas. Yesterday, Pradeep Mehta referred to demand, education and health. Probably this is one of the most pinching area. Again, the areas which are predominantly state government areas, because the machinery, the administrative machinery and the responsibility lies with the state government. In case of education, probably over the 30 years, thanks to COVID, had it been suggested before COVID, people would have laughed at that idea, that training online at all levels of education is now taken for granted. So much so that all competitive exam center classes, in fact, conduct parallelly all online sessions. So probably the only school which many of the students in the coming generation going to attend is going to be YouTube school. And state governments would be required to understand the implications of this, because that is going to change not only the delivery, but also the reach, also the quality, where the state government should play very, very significant role. Just as it was thought that having something like Bal Bharati in Maharashtra, that you have standardized kinds of text, certain minimum delivery of services, of the deliveries in the education and training must be made. There are teachers' manuals which have been created for that purpose. All this we now need to gear towards making it available online, and that too with many more complementary inputs. Like, for example, many a times showing a film from a Discovery or National Geographic channel is more educative than in fact teaching that in a conventional manner, descriptive manner in a classroom where there is nothing to imagine about. So these modalities of delivery in education are going to change, and in fact the state governments would be required to gear themselves up to this, not only an opportunity but a challenge, because now we would be required to create it in a relatively short interval. This is going to be another agenda for the coming 5 years, where the way in which education could be enabled and delivered better with the use of new kinds of information technology is going to be important component. Second, health. A similar kind of a thing can also be tried in case of health. Of course, it has its own special problems and so on. But leveraging these technologies, deliveries that are being made by the state governments to the potential beneficiaries of the population, it's something that should be a part of the immediate agenda, because that's the way you are going to prepare. Please also be equipped with how to deal with a menace that can cause an interference, otherwise the most laudable technology, namely GPT. The chat GPT now is going to be probably the most dominant teacher available at any point of time, including writing assignment to essays submitted by the student. Okay? So just like we have this anti-piracy software, we would also be required to generate anti-piracy software for the chat GPT content and so on. But this is another area where we have to focus the attention. Third major area, just 2-3 minutes, is that there is a certain kind of a climatic shifts which are occurring across globe, across India and states. This requires a different kind of a technological effort and inventive effort needed in that sector. For example, more than merely generating a better genetic material for plant in order to produce either more yield or more desirable qualities, it is equally necessary to hunt for such genetic resources which give ability to withstand high variations in climatic conditions. For example, what we call abiotic stress. There are some research centers which have already been initiated, but we have yet not made very great progress in dealing with the abiotic stress that the plants face, and this is going to be another major area, how to deal with different climatic conditions apart from the physical condition. For example, Israel provides a model of, in fact, covering the entire field in a short span of time, so that it's the kind of hurricanes or kind of high winds are likely to destroy the crops that could be at least minimized, if not entirely prevented. So this is another area where we require to have a shifting of the gears in terms of technology, and to have the manpower that would be equipped and capable of achieving this, including the other supporting inputs. For example, we have been advocating for installation of weather station at village level, at least a group gram panchayat level, so that something like a forecasting of the temperatures, humidity, all the major parameters that are relevant for farming could be more accurately predicted and pre-warned. So these are the areas where the work has been done, ideas have been suggested, but not much progress on ground. So probably emphasizing these three areas as the important avenues of initiative for policy. Policy does not necessarily mean that government does anything and everything. In fact, less it does, the better, because there are many more inventions, there are many more inventive actions that come. You just attend a farmer organized agricultural exhibitions and look at the young generation suggesting their own ingeniously devised kind of a solution, what is often called a jugaad. But going in the night when the water is going to be released, you have to get up and you have to walk all the way to the farm. Instead, you can do it on basis of your mobile, and one click you can do it and achieve it in your farm. These are the kinds of inventions that are being designed by voluntarily on their own by their initiative and innovativeness. Similarly, another important point which is often missed, rural area has its own variety of service sector, and this sector has been growing. This is something which is often not noticed, not separately estimated as well, or most of the time when it is estimated, it is mostly underestimated. For example, large number of what we call as unregistered enterprises, or in economist language, unorganized enterprises, in many of these services happen to be in fact operative in rural areas. So much so that I know at least in Maharashtra, 2 districts have a company which is formed, which is a pool of people, technicians who come together and provide all those services which typically farmer need. These are the kinds of institutional or the market responses which are generating, and they are likely to be in fact a characteristic future of something which we hope to see probably 30 years ahead. I'm not sure whether I will be there, most probably I will not. But these are the lines on which one has to think and equip oneself, including the government, and also allowing private sector to play its most meaningful role, anticipating these as the major directions of shifts both in service as well as in agriculture production. There are many subsectors where probably the specialization region-wise matters. For example, nature of agro-processing has undergone a change. Nature of warehousing, the scale with which the warehousing was at one time necessary or compulsory has changed. Because of solar power and solar panels, cold storages have become scalable. That means not upward, but in fact downward. You can also have a small cold storage based warehouse based on solar panels. So all these convergence of this technology is going to alter the nature of activities which are predominantly there in rural areas. They are not going to vanish, but they are going to change in their composition, change in their rapidity, change in their way of conducting the business, and that is something one needs to be equipped with, and that should be the primary agenda that the policymakers should address and focus. Thank you.
Ms. Bhushna Karandikar, Consultant, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations.
First of all, let me start thanking PIC for inviting me in this Augustus gathering and a very interesting theme. And let me start with confession. Pradeep being a Hadacha Shikshak, being the real teacher, he was my teacher. So what he told me yesterday and what he spoke today is entirely different. So please bear with me with my comments. Pradeep, thank you again for a wonderful and a very insightful story. Coming back, let me start. He mentioned about feminization of agriculture, and this is very important. We are having a bit of increased participation rates also now, but what is really happening, or what we should give to the policy as such, is that still, as everyone knows, that they don't have access to resources, and especially in India, I think mechanization is a big issue. We can learn lessons a lot from Bangladesh agriculture mechanization policy. They have a separate mechanization policy. They have a higher female rate in participation. So the machines that can be operated by women and that can result in higher productivity is very much essential. Just now, yesterday, there was a new announcement about Lakpati Didi. That is the drone operated by the self-help groups. I will come to that when I will talk about the agri-tech startups and all. But yes, this is what we have to give. Feminization is going to be the future trend, as Pradeep has already mentioned, and we have to take it forward with the policy gaps that are existing, mainly in the access. The second most important thing is that yes, women work, but they don't get money because we have a very skewed NWR system, negotiable warehouse receipt, where you need the Sadbara. Otherwise, you don't get money, and that has to be changed. Pradeep has already mentioned our study indirectly in terms of EcoZen, where there is a 3-ton, 5-ton solar-powered cold storage. Exactly similarly, we can monetize PACs. Primary Agriculture Cooperative Society. Argos is the best example of that. They are even allowing 50 kg of store. But we should somehow make an effort, policy effort, to include women into that. My second point was about the agriculture marketing system. Day by day, we will go I'm sure, different, rather better, or I'm sure different way from APMCs are bound to come. Maharashtra was on forefront, but still only 10% is by direct market licenses and contract farming and all that. Only 10%. So then why agriculture is, why farmers are going to APMCs? That's also a question we have to ask. And if we want, and of course we want to encourage this alternative marketing system, what we really need is the creating trade enablers, certification and traceability and standardization. These are the only trade enablers. Unfortunately, in domestic market, I think Pradeep sir already mentioned about the ISI standard. In agriculture, no one uses that. We use it in agriculture export because it's compulsory. But that shows that we can always, our farmer community always can adopt and can help it out. So, ENAM, same thing has happened. ENAM backend ka work ही नहीं है कुछ. See, what is ENAM? It's a faceless transaction. I should have a complete faith that whatever kind of soybean I am asking, I will get it at that price. Unless and until that is ensured, it won't happen. So I feel we have to invest a lot in certification, standardization. Sir, coming back to our Maharashtra state livelihood missions and all Bachat Gat are just doing dhana powder and jeera powder and whatever. Good for Bhimthadi Jatras for 8 days, but not as a sustainable business. But if we can give them a certification, I'm sure all the masala powders, all the Everest and all the big food company can buy from them. Same thing we have observed in Silk Mark, that we can get it done. So that was my comment on the agriculture. Yes, we will witness more and more of a new market eras, but we have to do at a policy level, we have to create India level certifications and standards even for the domestic market. Now coming back to the climate change, that's a reality. And it not only, climate change is bound to affect all of us, and in agriculture much more, because agriculture is also contributed massively to the greenhouse gases. So agriculture production as well as trade, we have to be careful. Now, as Harshavardhan Singh sir said, that without sustainability we cannot trade now. It has to be there. So we have to embed all those policies for climate smart agriculture, CSA, in production, in trade, in post-harvest, entire gamut of agriculture operation. We have a very, very robust agri-startup system. We have got more than 441 incubators. We have more than 1,500 agriculture startups working and successful. In this year, 20 to 23, we got investment of 1603 million US dollars in those startups. I think to fight with climate smart, to have climate smart agriculture, trade and everything, we have to leverage this startup ecosystem, and with Generation Z and millennials who are very, very sensitive about the climate change in general. So as a consumers as well as producers, I'm sure we can leverage on that, and that's the part of our demographic dividend. So again, coming back to, for the climate smart agriculture, we again have to have better standards which will signal less carbon footprints of the products, less food miles, and so on and so forth. It's a big topic. I won't come to that. Finally, I want to address the elephant in the room. Pradeep mentioned about Food Corporation of India, but it's not only FCI, it's the entire welfare food system, which consists of PDS, ICDS, MDM. Only ICDS and MDM are nutritionally related. NFHS survey, the latest family health survey shows 15 to 49, that's our demographic dividend, right? So those youngsters, more than 20% are suffering from lifestyle disease. More than 50% of women are anemic. I'm talking of only 15 to 49. So one clear future to reap the demographic dividend is we have to mix agriculture and nutrition somewhere. And to address that, we have to change this alternative or welfare food system. Kunte sir is here. We have, sir, my policy prescription for this is revitalize State Food Commission. NFSA, the National Food Security Act, Section 17, gives a wide range for State Food Commission to operate. It gives, many things like addressing to the new ways, linking it with institution, local. So we have to create this system as localized, decentralized, and nutritionally sensitive. And in making it, sir, we have to do the State Food Commission. We have to get them. Unfortunately, they are doing nothing, only complaint register, sir. Ration shop khula nahi hai, ye mila nahi hai. It can't be like that. And our, by the way, Maharashtra state regulation of NFSM means rules. It was a central act and the rules were framed by the states. And in our rules, sir, we have somehow constrained the State Food Commission's job chart. That's what I feel. So once again, thank you so much. These are my observations. There is one more thing, sorry, is about HortiNet and GrapeNet that Pradeep talked about. I was always involved in this. GrapeNet is the only successful horticulture net because grape growers are disciplined to write down everything since 90s, since Dabholkar sir, that is since 80s. They became successful, but if you want others to be successful and to be the equal partners in this new emerging market, as Pradeep said, we need a lot of training and capacity building. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Your State Food Commission idea is music to retired IAS officers. Okay, in the lighter vein it was. Anyway, now we discussed about the rural sector. Now let's move to discussion on urban sector, and we'll start with presentation by Dr. Amir Bazaz. He is joining online, and his paper is about securing urban future. Are you connected, Dr. Amir?
Thank you so much. I'm very sorry because of some sudden health scare in the morning. Although I was on my way to the airport, I had to take precautions. But I profusely apologize because this convening, which usually happens every December, is something that I look forward to. Listening to stalwarts, and I was very glued to what Pradeep sir was talking and also benefiting from his experience. So I have a presentation, and I will just share my screen. So I'll take about 15 minutes to put forward some points, which is a mix of last 5 years of my research and practice experience. So Pradeep sir was talking about the rural landscape, and as we all know, many of them come to cities in search of livelihoods and maybe to educate themselves, etc., etc. But the grim reality is that cities are really struggling, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to kind of live up to the promise of cities, which is now considered to be a weapon to or some kind of a transformative site for economic development and generating revenues and whatnot. So my presentation is divided into 3 parts. So very recently I have been looking at city and state finances and trying to kind of understand what is shifting. Is there something shifting? And talking about those things gives us some idea about what are the ways in which we could kind of bring together multiple prominent. The overarching goal of achieving in principle and in practice 74th constitutional amendment is important, but more important is to ensure that local infrastructure is in place, delivers services and contributes to welfare. So the thoughts are aligned around these 3 ideas, and I'll go step by step. So very recently we kind of looked at the finances of 33 ULBs, and this was over the period of the last decade, starting from 2012-13. And the idea was to examine the conventional sources of revenue and where's the expenditure happening, and what's the structure of revenue and expenditure side of the municipal finance story. Additionally, we also picked up 16 ULBs spread across the 3 classes. Class 1A, which are cities more than 50 lakh, Class 1B between 10 and 50, and then Class 1C between 1 and 10 lakh. And we wanted to see what's the form, nature, structure of capital expenditure in these cities. So some insights, and then I'll go to state analysis, which is focused on urban development, and then draw some 2 or 3 broad conclusions which would be beneficial for the agenda for which we have assembled here. So in terms of revenue side of the story, I think the story is pretty same. Intergovernmental transfers are maintaining their significance all through the last decade. So they are some kind. It's some kind of a reality, and over the last 5 years, its share across the three classes of cities has been roughly around 40%, and it's pretty constant. So that's one clear trend that we are seeing. On the expenditure side, as we all know, that much of the expenditure is on establishment and administrative matters, and around 45% is what the number is, and O&M, operations and maintenance expenditure, has been generally about one third. Why O&M is critical? Because it's closely linked to service delivery questions. But there are some interesting trends. For example, in mid-sized cities like 10 to 50 lakh population, there's some indication of rationalization that is happening. So some amount of administrative efficiency on ground can be observed. And surprisingly, we see that the O&M expenditure on average is quite high in class 1C cities. So some kind of a social demand operating through political channels is appeared to be functioning, at least in class 1C cities. None of the 16 cities that we studied. So while we see that in bigger cities the focus is on roads, bridges, and flyovers, the priorities in that's pretty much consistent across all the city classes. But we do see some element of priorities shifting, with some focus on stormwater, solid waste management, sanitation improvements, water supply. For example, surprisingly, in smaller cities, the priorities were more towards improving sewerage services, drainage services, sanitation services, improving water supply, which is very welcome, because it's the smaller cities that stay out of political and administrative focus, and such kind of a shift is welcome. But capital spending is by and large driven by program-based intergovernmental transfers, and these are happening partly through the centrally sponsored schemes and state-sponsored schemes, which I will talk about in a bit. Then we started looking at what's happening at the state level, and we picked up 5 states for our analysis. And if you can see from the table on the left, bulk of from centrally sponsored schemes and state schemes. You may see some amount of transfers happening to ULBs, about 43 to 58% on a very higher side in Rajasthan, but this is largely on account of covering for octroi loss that is happening in cities. So it's like octroi compensation. So the headline statement is that state schemes are important, centrally schemes are important, and which is connected to the earlier story that IGT's intergovernmental transfers is what is driving the agenda in cities, and therefore political motivations and agendas are also being driven through those kinds of funding flows, and which the next slide gives us an idea that if we look at the kind of state schemes that are in operation, they are largely focused on infrastructure development. But we see a state-wise shift, a very interesting shift that is happening on, say, for example, facilitating affordable housing, issues of land titling and slum upgradation, and also, as we all know, in Rajasthan, urban wage employment. So what I observe is, and there are different, very innovative ways in which these states are operating. Of course, they are via taking loans through development banks or facilitating through state revenue system. But what is heartening is that there is some amount of strategizing happening at the state level. and every state is trying to prioritize spending in qualitatively different ways. And therefore, what I feel is that there is a healthy channel that exists on the ground that is transmitting demand to the budgetary processes and also strengthening the mechanics of decentralized planning. And I think this is something that we need to watch more closely and try and figure out how these are working. And these are welcome signs because this is largely responding to the local crisis that we observe, crisis of poor service delivery, crisis of employment, crisis of housing, etc. On local finance and all of this, it kind of comes back to the 101 story of 74th constitutional amendment that look, we have not been able to achieve the desired goal of decentralized governance, and the three F's, funds, functions, and functionalities have not been devolved uniformly. And funds is a story that is being talked about quite often. And Vijay sir is there in the room, and he has been talking about formulaic-based GST devolution, which is definitely recommendation number one. But we thought perhaps we there are two possibilities that we should all explore very carefully. One is this idea of establishing an independent municipal services regulatory authority. And we have experience of the electricity commissions, electricity regulatory commissions, and this has been recommended, say for example, by the second Administrative Reform Commission, because the issue of cost recovery, pricing, tariffs, it has not been dealt quite efficiently over the last 2 decades, and perhaps we need to look at this option carefully now. And second is this inability to kind of generate revenue surplus, identify revenue and expand revenue sources, and identify new avenues of revenue improvement. Time has come perhaps to define a new fiscal discipline code for ULBs, and this is this has to be targeted. This has to be linked to targets on own revenues, targets on optimizing administrative expenses, and also targets of committing resources to O&M, which I feel should be at least 40% of the expenditure account on the expenditure. There are 3 or 4 reflections more, and I'll talk. First is, I think, this question of urban service delivery has to be relooked and reimagined. And my sense here is that we have to identify mechanisms that allow local politics to converge with welfare goals. And I'll talk with a specific example. So I think we have to have a very strong local political market, and that's perhaps some shift that we can experiment with, as we have seen in many states where innovative schemes and programs have been launched. Second is that I think we have to kind of recognize that there's massive heterogeneity in our cities. This is not a uniform landscape. We have different kinds of people living, different kinds of infrastructure available, different kinds of development processes, and we need to have a differentiated strategy. So one kind of an intervention or uniform intervention would perhaps not work, and therefore we'll have to devise ways that responds to multiple typologies that we see in our cities. So the point that I'm making is that we need to understand these typologies and then devise typology specific urban response. And the last thing is that Everyone knows this. It's just reiterating that primacy to livelihood should anchor much of the urban reforms process. And it will require imaginative planning to kind of also uh, think of converging development goals with other goals, such as the goals on reducing climate risk and disaster risk. And therein lies the opportunity, and I'll elaborate on this a little uh, later. In terms of the first point, where we are discussing the idea of convergence, I spent 2.5 to 3 years working in Siliguri, which is a town in North Bengal. It's a very strategically important town. It's a gateway to the northeast, but it's also politically quite active, and it also has a certain governance structure where political representation assumes primacy. So the decision making is not at the city level. Decision making is happening through politics, much less through administrative efficiency goals. And I was there studying migrants, and it has a checkered history. Different kinds of people have come into the city from different parts of the country. Some driven by violence, and some driven by agrarian distress. And it's a very service oriented town. And the question before us, which came from the administration, was that how can we improve migrant conditions there? And the idea was to respond to the questions of vulnerability reduction, and if you look at this red highlighted thing, it tells us what we arrived at. So what was vital for us was to understand that political legitimacy is important to examine developmental questions. So there was a lot of interference that you can not ask these questions, you cannot assess this. So political legitimacy was important, and therefore we needed to be creative in terms of understanding, of shaping our research and our inquiry. And therefore the questions need to be politically relevant. And what emerged was that political acceptance, of course, we know come in many ways, but in this case, it was linked to local welfare policies. So when they talked about, when we started examining how can we improve, the idea was, as earlier ma'am was also talking about, that let's forget infrastructure. Let's look at things that are necessary for survival. So food became a very important issue. Food distribution became a very important issue. So we needed to be imaginative, that how can we think of identifying mechanisms that help us converge local politics with welfare delivery. And that was and it's like a deliberative space. It doesn't happen very definitively. It is very iterative, but perhaps this is what it is. So if I give you the example of the urban development structure that is changing, and the kind of schemes that many state governments are coming up with, surprisingly in states like Kerala, not surprisingly, but quite welcoming, that states like Kerala and states like Odisha and states like Rajasthan are responding to the environment crisis. So some kind of local politics is at play, and I think that imaginative convergence is necessary. Second, on this typology question, and we did this research and understanding what is happening with migrants in cities. And when we did a number of interviews, we realized that, and we plotted them. So there's time on the right side, on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, it's well-being. And these are subjective well-being, so you report what your well-being perception is. And you see that this is not a uniform playground at all. So we have different kinds of people and different kinds of coping mechanisms and different kinds of outcomes based on shocks. So some are just surviving, some are possibly adapting, and they're adapting because they started owning some shop. So Pradeep sir was talking about that. Why are we not thinking carefully about non-farm economies, and that's also happening in urban areas. So it's kind of protecting people. And then, of course, Pradeep sir also talked about human capital. He talked about education and health, and sometimes even in cities, you just don't have the capacity to cope. So you basically go out of the system and go back to your native. So there are many kinds of people, there are many kinds of formulations or typologies at play. We can't be thinking of an urban response without recognizing these typologies. And if we want to bring the other goals now, climate and disaster risk reduction, this is being considered now as an opportunity to leapfrog into something which is more sustainable. This is from the latest report that we did, that even if we are thinking about from a climate point of view, we cannot think about urban as a uniform landscape. So strategies are linked to the kind of typologies at play. So there are emerging cities, there are rapidly growing cities, and there are established cities. And the blue colored circle is pointing to compact cities, and the purple color color is corresponding to autocentric cities, which is like an urban sprawl. So therefore, strategies also differ, and different places, different kinds of strategies would work, because it's also not only about outcomes, because it's also about efficiently utilizing whatever resources you have. So this typology idea becomes very, very critical. So we have to get a sense of who these people are in the cities and what kind of fragmentation exists in the city. We did some analysis in almost about 12 local bodies in Karnataka.
Dr. Amir, can I request you to...
Last slide, sir.
Yeah.
Last slide. Okay. So we did some analysis looking at the town municipal councils, the corporations, and we see that nothing is uniform. So in some places we have pockets of robust economic opportunities, but in some cases we don't have that. So if we think about economic diversification, if we think about from a typology point of view, perhaps we will be able to better strategize. And my last submission would be that vulnerability reduction and service sector would be your key axis, but we are not imaginatively yet thinking about how we could leverage this as a primary axis to think about urban reform. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Amir.
The screen.
Now continuing with the urban theme, we will have remarks from Mr. Mahesh Zagade. He is former Principal Secretary to Government of Maharashtra. He is not new to Pune. He was Pune Municipal Commissioner and also Metropolitan Commissioner of PMRDA. So very illustrious career. Mahesh, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Chairperson, sir, Dr. Pradeep, and our eminent experts. Dr. Amir has comprehensively brought out the issues about securing the urban future. I must really thank the PIC for considering this topic as one of the agenda for giving inputs to the policymakers, because this is not just any issue. It is the issue that is really going to bother this country. If not we have spoken about the rural areas and but we cannot discuss rural and urban as such. We have to discuss both the things together. Rural, I will come to it later on when we discuss about take question and answers. But let me concentrate on urbanization and how to secure its future and the agenda. And I am just going to mention few points to supplement what Dr. Amir has said. See, the arrow is going just in one direction. For last 70 years, we are migrating to urban areas. That is there. For 70,000 years, not 70,000 years, But especially the acceleration started after the revolution of agriculture about 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. And by AD 1800, only 3% population was living in urban areas. But something happened because of industrialization and rapid population growth. Today, about 57% population of the world is living in urban areas just 200 years. And this is not going to like a plateauing this anymore, right? It is going to go up and up. So we are going to experience turbo urbanization, especially in next 2-3 decades. And it's very serious. Unfortunately, the planners and policymakers and people like us, we have given some attention to it, but not the attention that is really required to do. And why we should be giving attention to it, not just to provide services to the people coming to urban areas and staying there and making their life happy or, joyful. See, the studies at various universities indicate that in next 2-3 decades, about 70 to 75, 80% GDP is going to come from urban areas only. 70 to 80% employment is also will be getting generated in urban areas, and energy requirement as well as the pollution will also be centralized in urban areas. So urban areas going to be the in thing, or the story of this planet is going to be written in urban areas, and probably this planet will be an urban planet in those 2-3 decades. But the problem is not uniform across the world. 84% of North American continent has already become urbanized. So is Europe. 82% of Europe is already urbanized. So maximum urbanization story is going to happen China, India, and some parts of Africa like Nigeria and some other countries. So we as a country, we need to have this agenda very high on the board. How we need to, otherwise we are going to have cities like monstrous cities, not just planned cities. And we have to really think from that perspective. All our policies have to be oriented, just like we just in the morning discussed about the competition policies and the reform, regulation reforms and all that. We have to think comprehensively. Here also, we need to think like this is also a generation of employability, generation of sustenance of economy, and of course the energy requirement, all that. We need to think about the urban story. We do have urbanization policy for the country. I don't know how many of you have really heard of it. It is not very much known to general public, or for that matter, not too many in the bureaucracy also. But we do have lack of urbanization policies across the country in the states. We do not have. We probably should be suggesting that every state should have its own urbanization policy, so that it becomes a structured urbanization and not a monstrous kind of urbanization. Problem with the urbanization is another issue. It's not happening uniform. They have identified about the 50 mega urban agglomerations in the world, which are going to concentrate like Eastern Japan or Western American part of coastal area. So we are going to have at least 2 in India. One is NCR and another is of course Mumbai, Pune and Nashik, and there are few others in the country. So we need to have some policy about how much we are going to have, or what size of mega urban agglomerations we are going to allow. We need to have structured thinking on this. While doing that, we need to have whether we have any constitutional or statutory support for this. We do have. Like Dr. Amir has said about the 74th Amendment, we have 3 specific provisions in the Constitution, Article 243ZD and Article 243E. In that Constitution, for the first time, they have considered district as a planning unit, and not just a planning unit for the programs of the governments, but even for the special planning also. And in that, the governments and the local bodies are statutorily required to assess the available resources and then to allow urbanization or growth depending on the natural resources, for example, water. Now, we cannot allow the FSI or whatever as per your own fancies and whims. It has to be tagged to the availability of water, because water you are not going to import from anywhere else. Whatever the precipitation is going to happen forever, and you cannot really borrow water from anywhere else. So this particular thing that was ingrained while the 73rd and 74th amendments were being discussed, and this 243ZE and 243ZD, the district planning committees and metropolitan planning committees, they are mandated to take assessment of natural availability of natural resources and do spatial planning. Unfortunately, these two things, of course, district planning committees are being used to allocate resources amongst MPs and MLAs and all that, and just that, nothing else, and they're haggling with the guardian minister, that's all, nothing more than that. Metropolitan planning committees are also not being used for this purpose. So what we need to really tell the governments that you please use these two provisions for planning. Now we are sitting in Pune city. If we think about Pune, and if you consider how much population we can accommodate in this region, depending on the water availability. When I was PMRD commissioner, I had done a quick assessment. The water availability, 90 liters per capita, and not 135 liters that is today. I consider it little less. Only 2 crores 37 lakh population can be accommodated. But today we have allowed through the plans like Pune Corporation, Pimpri-Chinchwad Corporation and rural areas, which is more than 7 crores of populations who are going to get accommodated. That is the kind of planning, skewed planning. So we need to, this could be anywhere in the country. It's not just Pune specific, but since I happen to be there, I had done. Secondly, about the economic development, people no more come and live any cities like a pensioner city or whatever. They need to have some economic activity, employment. And basic is about the economic activity. It is the mandate by the constitution that the local bodies are supposed to pay attention to it. So for last 30 years, when the 74th amendment came in 1973 onwards, they are supposed to create economic development plans, city specific, that is in the constitution. I do not know in this whole country whether any city has come out with economic development plan. So Mahatma Gandhi, he, his salt satyagraha, he said, no, I will not abide by the rules of Britishers. Now we have, we have not, these constitutional provisions we have thrown it to the wind for last 30 years. I don't think. When I ask some people whether we have this, yes, but that is the budget, not the economic development plan. So we need to have economic development plans, and I think we must tell the governments that please at least go by the constitutional mandate. Otherwise, you amend that constitution if you do not want it. Of course, there is another provision that they have to have social justice plans also. Leave it aside. To lessen the strife amongst the communities and all that, they are supposed to have those plans also. But let's concentrate on the economic development. When PMRDA, and that time I was glad that some NGOs from Pune itself, they gave 5 crores to generate economic development for PMR, and we wanted PMR to be growth of engine, not for Maharashtra, but for entire India, that how economic growth can be kick-started. So this we need to, in urbanization, we need to pay attention to these areas rather than remaining entrenched into the service providers, smart cities or whatever it is that, but we need to go to the basics that what future is holding. Third provision in the constitution, that is about the, Dr. Amir mentioned it briefly, the state commissions. Central finance commissions are working very well. In fact, I really laud their roles right from the beginning, right from this Gadgil formula and all that, it is coming down. With that, 42% resources are coming back to the states. And of course, devolution is depending on the various factors. The state finance commissions, as provided in the 74th amendment, were supposed to function like that of the Central Finance Commission. But unfortunately, many of the states, I will not use the word most, but many of the states have given a go by to the constitutional mandate to them. What was expected that whatever the state's resources, they could have apportioned some percentage to the local bodies, municipal corporations, just like central government is doing it to the for the state governments through the directives of the finance commissions. This has not happened, and therefore the city's infrastructure, their expansion is a big question mark. They are not able to even provide for their services. For expansion, the money is not there. It is supposed the state is supposed to give the money. Of course, there is an argument that the state and the central government is they are providing money through schemes, but these are the tied monies. Unlike this Central Finance Commission, they give money just like that. You do whatever you want to do. Of course, within the parameters. Here, that money doesn't come to the municipal corporations or the Jilla Parishads or any other local bodies, and that's going to create huge problem. Of course, some money comes as a part of stamp duty and all, but it's a very paltry money. Now, if you consider if this story continues, then probably cities will not be as they are supposed to be, because they are finding it very difficult even to maintain their day-to-day services, for expand the infrastructure, and to create the employment or the economic generation activities. I don't think any money is left out or any thought process is also there. So we have to really pull up our socks collectively across the country and see that in next 2-3 decades, 70% India is going to live in urban areas. And it's a serious matter. Now, another issue which is connected to the, I'm just making one point and then I stop it here, about the rural and agriculture, what Professor Pradeep has said. What is the problem? Problem is not about what we are going to do agriculture, but the production has gone really, thanks to the Norman Borlaug and M.S. Swaminathan, all those stalwarts. It's there, it is settled now. Probably there is some scope for increase. Where is the problem? Again, we should not be thinking like how we do it. It is not just agrarian economy, but it's the economy of the country. I am not very good at figures, but probably 17% GDP comes from the agriculture of the country. It differs with the state. And 55% population depends on that. So 17% supports 55% population, and 83% GDP supports 45% population. We need to have sectoral balances, sectoral knee corrections, so just like USA has done. USA's 1% GDP is coming from agriculture and 1% population is depending on agriculture. They migrated their entire agriculture dependent population, which was there in 1930s and 40s, to services and industries. Now, do we have that opportunity? Does India that have opportunity? No. The doors are closing. And as per the World Economic Report of 2018, in next about 15-20 years, 65% of the current world jobs are going to get vanished. Of course, some new jobs, high-end jobs are going to get created. But not. Of course, this World Economic Forum report got diluted because of some pressures from corporations and all that. But it is the fact remains that the jobs are dwindling down, and therefore we cannot transfer this agriculture dependency to services, and we need to have sustainable agriculture employment. Also, we need to think differently in this thing. We cannot think what happened in the Western world. So we have to have, and I will stop here. We need to, like 83% economy decides their value of their services and their manufactured goods, where agriculture doesn't do that. We need to think of, in 21st century, some policy like aggregation through technology or whatever, to give right to the farmers, to their clusters, to decide upon their products. In fact, one of the meetings, public meetings, I had suggested to Agriculture Minister, Mr. Balasaheb Thorat was Agriculture Minister, that sir, you please close down your agriculture universities and convert them into agriculture marketing universities. Because we have done a lot in terms of increasing the productivity per acre or this thing. So that was, of course, in a very lighter vein. But we need to have some solution to give right to the farmers to decide and increase there. Like what happened in South Korea, Tamil Undong, that was a moment where the agriculture per capita income was more than the industrial and services sector at one point of time. We need to think about such things, and then we can really increase the sustenance level, our GDP, and give more opportunity rather than contract farming and whatever, that is not going to. We need to think that this 55% dependency has to be financially, economically supported. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we'll open for Q&A.
You brought forward two vital issues. One about how much
You are
money
addressing
is...
to Mahesh?
Yes, sorry. Mr. Jagdi. One is about how much money is generated through the agricultural activity and how much population depends on that. One of the solutions could be value addition in agricultural products. Therefore, if we promote processed food activity, that will really help people at every level. Second thing about creating agricultural marketing universities. This is just not possible because of the political pressures. Agricultural marketing cannot be looked into by sheer economic principles, but by political pressures and by many other things I don't have to mention here. Third thing, about using resources for agriculture. Now, one current issue is making ethanol from sugar. How much water is consumed to make sugar first and then to make ethanol out of it? It's a very serious matter.
Please tell to whom your question
Thank
is
you. No,
addressed.
I have three comments and questions to Mr. Zagade and Amit Bajaj on urban and rural. Of course, Pradeep Apte's presentation was excellent. He covered the whole ambit, except I have a few questions to him also. But Mr. Kunte, I didn't know that you were former Chief Secretary of Maharashtra until I saw the program. It makes it interesting.
Municipal Commissioner for Bombay also.
Mumbai, yeah.
So both you and Mr. Zagade, I would like to charge with the failure of Article 74. Yeah. Yes. Right. I mean, you did not allow it to be implemented, including what I see around the country, what the state governments have done cleverly, including in Maharashtra, to set up development authorities, development corporations, and removed municipalities from the game. That was the intention. At least, fortunately, 73rd has been, better implemented in the country than 74th has been not implemented at all. And then we keep on crying about this, that, and the other. So I hold both of you responsible for that. Mr. Kunte, in your opening remarks, you spoke about policy window. We've been doing policy advocacy for long. I must share with the audience a very interesting story. In India, we had a Hathi Singh committee report which drafted the essential list of drugs. What are the essential list of medicines? And which we never implemented. Once again, political will or bureaucratic lapse or inertia, what have you. Zafarullah Chaudhry, a health activist in Bangladesh, went to Arshad Mohammad, the then dictator, and spoke to him about this problem. And Arshad Mohammad heard him, and then Arshad Mohammad had a tick in his eye. So Zafarullah asked him, Zafarullah was a medical doctor and an activist, more of a health activist than a practicing doctor. He said, do you take enterobiaform for your diarrhea? Arshad said, yes. He said, that's a banned drug. And Arshad Mohammad, in spite of all the corporate pressures on him, US corporate pressures, signed the essential list as a part of Bangladesh's drug policy. I mean, I thought it was an excellent example of a policy window which you saw. I mean, unless Zafarullah could understand that this fellow is suffering from diarrhea. And therefore, now just two, on feminization of agriculture, I mean, two good examples generally which come to my mind is one of the sort of the queens in Ghana, all the trade of maize, etc., is done only by females. No man is allowed into that thing. It is evolved as an institution. Secondly, something which is happening in India, which we don't recognize clearly as a part of rural development, is solar mamas, which Bankar Roy in Ajmer is training hundreds of women around in Africa to become solar mamas, handle solar lanterns, handle simple things, and be able to repair it also and see to it that it runs. Now, in terms of rural non-farm economy, if you heard the latest statement by Ramesh Chand, who I admire greatly, we've been friends for a long time, and he said that we do not, what you also said, he just restated that there are a lot of opportunities which are happening in rural non-farm sector, which we are not recognizing as the way forward, rather than to look at urbanization as the only panacea. As it is, our cities are all cities are, tearing apart. The resources are just, overwhelming. The demand on resources are overwhelming and cities are crumbling. So what do we look forward? And Ramesh Chand has argued for, greater focus on rural non-farm sector, which is the way forward for our country, instead of, trying to copy some Western model of having more and more cities. That is, now, in terms of APMC reforms, there was a committee set up by Sharad Pawar when he was Agriculture Minister, with the Maharashtra Cooperation Minister as the chair. And that came out with very good recommendations on reforms. Unfortunately, that could not happen again. Sorry? Guru Committee. Then subsequently, of course, we had this the government at the center coming up with these 3 bills, which failed because of several reasons. Which, the main reason was the communication was very poor. So the recommendation which I would make for this workshop is to go forward to the government and say, look, you please revive it. Start having a longer term dialogue with the farmers' lobby. See, what had happened was, very interestingly, I don't know whether people know about this, Adani's built a very large number of warehouses in Haryana, and Ambani's set up a lot of buying houses in Punjab. Geo towers were being damaged during that agitation. It was a grouse being explored against the crony capitals, the big capital. And that is why those excellent farming reforms failed. I still remember a very famous farmer activist of Maharashtra, another friend of mine, Sharad Joshi. And Shetkari Sangathan continues to, support those measures as against what was being opposed by many others. So that has to be, Pradeep, has to be revisited in the recommendation that we come forward in this particular thing. That look, these are things which should not give up. These are essential and necessary, which we have been talking about for a long time. ENAM was mentioned, and you rightly mentioned that the way it is, the back end is being handled is, hopeless. And 74th Amendment, including having a municipal bond market, is so important, which is again has to come from the center. No, it should. No, as a policy measure. The APMC is again a policy advice. It is not a union law. It is a model act which the government of India has drafted, so states can adopt it to this. So similarly, a model law should be done. Another recommendation which we don't have, to set up a municipal bond market, that is a way forward, which my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? We'll request both the panelists to respond. So first, Mahesh Zagade.
Yeah. Thank you. First, about value addition. That's a very good this thing, and attempts are being made through central government's policies and the state governments also, but it's not enough. One problem in this particular this processing is that the processing, whatever addition happens, that remains with the this processor and doesn't get translated or doesn't get transferred to the farmers. We're talking about the rural economy, agrarian economy, that is farmer specific and not the manufacturer or the service this service sector specific. So that is important. I do not have my current figures because figures are not coming out nowadays. My last figure about the processing in this country agriculture produce was about 7 to 8%. Fruits and vegetables are processed. In Brazil, more than 70% the fruits and vegetables are processed, and then addition is there, value addition is there, and that's how the agrarian economy is like fortified there. So there is a case for this, but there has to be some policy which can shift additional earning to farmers. Second is about in this particular thing, when these three acts were being opposed by farmers in Delhi under the process and all that, Punjab. That time, of course, this agitation prompted me to write an article in Indian Express. Of course, that was not the right opportune time for me to do that, but I did it. I had suggested that instead of MSP, minimum support price, that is one of the things, I had supposed FTMP, first trade minimum price. The first trade that farmer does has to have a minimum price under the statute, and that can take care of many things so that the farmer gets more, like returns from his produce, some kind of this thing. So, in addition to the processing, some such policy inputs can also elevate the income of the farming community. Second, you said about the water in sugar industry. Yes, of course it is there. But yesterday's, day before yesterday's notification about government banned manufacture of ethanol from sugarcane. Molasses is on. But again, I think it's a policy like banning of export of onions. Now you are subsidizing masses, consumers by depriving the farmers their income. That should not be done. In fact, if you want to do it, you can subsidize the income the consumers directly. Here also, like your competition, the sugar. Now sugar internationally at many times is much lower prices than India. So they should allow import also. And the farmers, if they are benefiting from conversion of sugarcane into ethanol directly, they should be allowed. They should not be like, these are the policies where this goes against the farm sector. About the 74th and your charge against. That's more for 9:1. 9. No. 9:1 is that 9 parts of the equity is given by the state, and 1 part of equity is given collected by them. It's for that. Basically, it emanated from it. Now, your charge against non-implementation of 1974th Amendment. Basically, 74th Amendment was designed on the basis of Maharashtra statute. So it was the model law for that. Unfortunately, some of the provisions were not implemented because the whole bureaucratic structure was functioning from 1962 onwards, like the statute that it was. So did not absorb the kind of changes that were made through the 74th Amendment. Secondly, the beauty of governance is that there has to be continuous monitoring. We mistook that the local self-government, they are self-government, and then we lost the opportunity of monitoring them. So state monitoring whether how much per capita water is the availability is there in that city. If it is less, then what that city is doing, whether they are not providing adequate water, or municipal solid waste, whether they are not doing it. This was not monitored, and it was left to the local bodies. I think robust monitoring, that's where we failed in Maharashtra, and that's how it is coming. The district throughout you are charging about the district planning committee is also model for Narega also. About the district planning committees is also the model of Maharashtra, and then of course Gujarat and Karnataka also, that was emulated there. No, that also we continued like the earlier ones. The special provision about the special planning that is not being implemented in Maharashtra, which needs to be implemented across the country, not just in Maharashtra.
Of course, I think the remaining things, I think.
There are two markets, or rather two aspects, which I thought I would speak about, but it would have been too long. One is uses of water in Maharashtra, because you referred to sugarcane consuming it. Actually, there are many farmers who have now switched to drip, where the water use has come down very drastically. So you will have more ethanol out of less water. Number two, there is also another problem, which is quite a complicated problem. You see, if you want private investment to flow into agriculture, including the forward as well as backward linkages, the land entitlement and its transferability and the extant tenancy laws is also another problem, and that has to be looked into. In fact, this transfer, if you want to make the lease safe, enforceable, yet remunerative, then you require a kind of a record system which is yet to be completely realized. Though there have been now efforts to have cadastral maps and so on and so forth, but yet that is another major hurdle in reforming agriculture in terms of its commercial transformation.
Okay, so we have exceeded the time given to us, but anyway, it was a very lively session. So I'll conclude with some observations very briefly. First of all, I want to say that, he mentioned about 74th Amendment. At the time that 74th Amendment was brought about, they may not have envisaged the emergence of mega cities that is happening now, Mumbai, NCR and things like that. So maybe my first suggestion is that we need more research to study how mega cities are governed and how they can be governed better. Maybe Gokhale Institute or National Institute of Urban Affairs can take up this research and look at the governance of mega cities itself as a challenging issue. Second thing is that to make urban sector cities better, we need better municipal systems. Municipal corporations, municipalities have to become better, and that is where the basic concept of funds and functionaries, these have to be delegated to the municipalities. That has not happened despite 74th Amendment. Most important is funds. We all say in Marathi, paishaचं सोंग आणता येत नाही. So how we ensure that funds reach the municipalities, and here I really appreciate the lecture, Kelkar Sahib, your lecture, sir. BPR Vittal Memorial Lecture. I studied it quite intensely. A very fine lecture, sir, and some of the points I am drawing from this lecture only. So, sir has suggested, and I think it should go into suggestions for the new government or for the political parties. First is to amend Article 266 of the Constitution to create a consolidated fund for municipalities and panchayats, just as we have consolidated fund for center as well as state, so a consolidated fund for municipalities and panchayats. This will ensure that the funds are adequately ring-fenced and they go to municipalities and are not usurped by other entities in the system. Then his second very valid suggestion is to amend Articles 243H and 243X of the Constitution to ensure that revenues allocated by center meant for the municipalities don't land up in the coffers of the state consolidated fund, because once they land up there, then municipalities have to go with begging bowl to the Mantralaya, and they may or may not get their funds. So this is second amendment. Third, I found very, I have been a municipal commissioner, he has also been, and if we get revenue in this fashion, we will be so delighted. Sir, you have suggested in your article very rightly that there should be constitution amendment to ensure that center and states share a part of their GST. He is suggesting you have 12% standard rate of GST for everything. Out of 12%, center keeps 5, states keep 5, and 1% they contribute to local, there's municipalities and if that happens, a large chunk of money will flow into municipalities, and that will help to make cities and villages better. Another suggestion is municipalities or planning bodies, they can go for land monetization. Both of us have practically handled these issues of land monetization. These are not easy. In theory, it is easy to say that land has value and that should be monetized. But the number of allegations of scandals, etc., that happen in these land-related cases, very few municipal commissioner would venture into that, because you will land up with some CAG para or inquiry or something. So there I would suggest, while land monetization is a very valid policy suggestion, it should be backed by some supporting legislation, so that the officers also feel safe and secure about handling these matters. Coming to rural areas, we have discussed about agriculture and how to make the economy, kickstart the economy of the rural areas. I have some points about governance. So first point is that, earlier a Pura scheme was there. So providing urban amenities in rural areas. Why rural-urban migration happens is because you don't have amenities, not and economic opportunities. So Pura scheme was basically twinning of rural infrastructure development and economic opportunities with provision of urban-like amenities in rural areas. So that will develop the villages also. People would also like to stay back in the villages rather than flock to cities. Or even if they flock to cities, the rate of migration into cities would be somewhat manageable for the cities also. So this is one suggestion, that some avatar or version of Pura scheme can be recommended again in the new for the new government to take into account. And lastly, sir, I want to suggest that now in last 10 years or 15 years, we have built lot of infrastructure, mainly, expressways. So just take the example of Samruddhi Expressway. I don't know how many of you have traveled on it. So Samruddhi Expressway is connecting the hinterland of Maharashtra. All these districts, Buldana, Hingoli, Wardha, Amravati. So these all, the expressway allows, connectivity. That is, the villages around that expressway, they can easily get connected to the value chain and access markets that can give them lot of income. So we must take into account the emerging, the new network of infrastructure that is taking place, and see how our rural economy can get better connected using these new infrastructure facilities. So these are some of my suggestions, and I feel extremely honored that I got a chance to chair this very important session. I thank all the panelists, to start with Professor Pradeep Apte and then Bhushana Karandikar for rural areas and agriculture, and Dr. Amir Bazaz and Mahesh Zagde for their comments on urban areas. And of course, Mahesh is versatile enough, so he also made very valuable comments about agriculture also. So I thank everybody and thank all of you here for patient hearing. Thank you so much.